The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the 100th time. The red wool jacket with its golden braiding felt heavier than usual, and the tall black bearskin hat seemed to press down on his thoughts. He had been a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 3 years, but today felt different. Today, something was about to change his life forever. Marcus stood perfectly still at his post, his rifle held at the precise angle drilled into him during countless hours of training. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, just as protocol demanded. The tourists gathered around him, snapping photos and making jokes about his statue-like posture. Some tried to make him laugh or flinch, but Marcus had mastered the art of remaining motionless. It was more than just training. It was a point of pride. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves mixed with the exhaust from the busy London streets beyond the palace gates. Marcus could hear the familiar sounds of the changing of the guard ceremony being prepared in the distance. His shift would end in 2 hours, and he looked forward to removing the heavy uniform and relaxing with his mates at the local pub. Then she appeared. Sarah walked through the palace gates wearing the dress blue uniform of the United States Marine Corps. She was part of an international military exchange program, visiting various ceremonial units across Europe. Her posture was as rigid and professional as any royal guard, her chin held high with obvious pride in her service. The morning light caught the polished brass buttons on her uniform, creating small flashes that seemed to dance in Marcus's peripheral vision. Marcus tried to maintain his focus straight ahead, but something about this Marine was different. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself with such confidence, or maybe it was the determined look in her eyes as she observed the palace procedures. Whatever it was, he found himself fighting an almost overwhelming urge to turn his head and look directly at her. Sarah had been specifically chosen for this exchange program because of her exceptional military bearing and discipline. At 25, she had already served 2 tours overseas and had earned respect from her fellow Marines for her dedication and professionalism. She approached military traditions with the same seriousness that Marcus brought to his duties as a royal guard. As Sarah walked closer to Marcus's position, she began studying the precision of his stance and the perfection of his uniform. She had heard stories about the legendary discipline of the Queen's Guard, and she wanted to observe their techniques firsthand. Her own military training had taught her to appreciate the dedication required to maintain such standards. The distance between them closed gradually. Sarah's military boots clicked rhythmically against the courtyard stones, each step bringing her closer to where Marcus stood guard. She could see the fine details of his uniform now, the perfectly pressed fabric, the gleaming brass buttons, the way his white gloves gripped his rifle with practiced ease. Marcus felt his heart beginning to beat faster, though his expression remained completely neutral. Years of training had taught him to control every muscle in his face, but he couldn't control the racing thoughts in his mind. Who was this Marine? What brought her to the palace? Why did her presence seem to affect him so strongly when he had stood unmoved through countless distractions before? Sarah stopped directly in front of Marcus, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to study his technique. She had positioned herself there partly for observation and partly because she felt drawn to this particular guard. There was something about his bearing that impressed her, a quality that went beyond mere training to touch something deeper. The silence that followed was unlike anything either of them had experienced. It wasn't the usual silence of military discipline or the quiet of a formal ceremony. This was something electric, something that seemed to fill the space between them with unspoken understanding. Neither moved, neither spoke, yet both felt as if an entire conversation was taking place through their shared stillness. Marcus had never felt anything like this during his time as a royal guard. He had stood through rainstorms, heat waves, and crowds of thousands without losing his composure. But now, with this Marine standing before him, He felt as if the very air around him had changed. Every instinct told him to maintain his position, but every fiber of his being wanted to acknowledge her presence. Sarah recognized something familiar in Marcus's disciplined stance. She saw the same commitment to duty that drove her own military service, the same pride in tradition that had shaped her own career. But beyond the professional recognition, she felt something personal stirring, something that had nothing to do with military protocol and everything to do with the man beneath the uniform. The tourists around them seemed to fade into the background. The sounds of London traffic became distant and muted. Even the other guards and palace staff seemed to disappear from their awareness. In that moment, the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, standing in perfect military bearing while something profound passed between them. Marcus's training fought against his emotions. Every rule of his position demanded that he remain focused on his duties, that he ignore all distractions and maintain the dignity of his post. But Sarah wasn't just any distraction. She was a fellow warrior, someone who understood the sacrifices and dedication that military service required. The recognition of this shared understanding made their silent communication even more powerful. Sarah felt her own professional composure being challenged in ways she hadn't expected. She had come to the palace as part of her military education to learn about different ceremonial traditions and to represent her country with honor. She hadn't expected to find herself drawn to one of the guards in a way that transcended professional interest. The minutes stretched on, though neither could have said how long they remained locked in this silent exchange. Time seemed suspended in the space between them, held in place by the intensity of their unspoken connection. Other visitors passed by, guards moved to their positions, and palace life continued around them. But Marcus and Sarah remained fixed in their moment of recognition. Finally, duty called from both directions. Sarah knew she needed to continue her tour and complete her observations of the palace ceremonies. Marcus could hear the approach of his relief guard, signaling the end of his watch. The spell of their silence would soon be broken by the demands of their respective responsibilities. But in those final seconds before duty separated them, both Marcus and Sarah understood that something significant had happened. Neither knew what it might lead to or how they might build upon this moment of connection. They only knew that their lives had been touched by something unexpected and profound, something that would stay with them long after they resumed their military duties. As Sarah began to step away, she maintained her military bearing, but allowed the slightest nod of respect toward Marcus. It was barely perceptible, a gesture so subtle that only another military professional would recognize it as acknowledgement of their shared moment. Marcus, still bound by his duty to remain motionless, couldn't return the gesture, but his eyes carried a message of understanding that Sarah received clearly. The silence between them had spoken volumes about honor, duty, and the unexpected connections that can form between people who understand the weight of service. Both knew that this was only the beginning of something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about military discipline and personal desires. The next morning arrived with unusual anticipation for Marcus. He had barely slept, replaying the previous day's encounter in his mind countless times. As he prepared for another day of guard duty, he found himself hoping that the American Marine would return, though he tried to convince himself that such thoughts were unprofessional. Sarah had spent her evening researching the traditions and schedules of the Royal Guard. What she told herself was professional curiosity drove her to learn about shift rotations, ceremonial duties, and the rigid protocols that governed every aspect of a guard service. She convinced herself that this knowledge was essential for her military exchange report, though deep down, she knew her motivations were far more personal. Marcus took his position at the same post as the day before, his uniform as immaculate as always, his bearing as perfect as his training demanded. But beneath the surface calm, his senses were heightened, alert for any sign of the Marine who had affected him so profoundly. He mentally rehearsed maintaining his composure should she appear again, though he wondered if he would be able to repeat yesterday's perfect discipline. When Sarah walked through the palace gates for the second time, she wore her dress uniform with even more precision than before. She had spent extra time that morning ensuring every detail was perfect, from the alignment of her ribbons to the shine on her shoes. She told herself this attention to detail was simply professional pride, but she knew she wanted to make the best possible impression. Their eyes met across the courtyard almost immediately. Despite the distance between them and the crowds of tourists and staff moving through the area, they seemed to find each other with an almost magnetic pull. Sarah began walking toward Marcus's position, her steps measured and purposeful, while Marcus fought to maintain his required stillness despite the surge of recognition and anticipation he felt. As Sarah approached, Marcus noticed details he had missed the day before. The way her hair was pulled back in regulation style, the small scar above her left eyebrow that spoke of real military experience, the confident set of her shoulders that marked her as someone accustomed to command and responsibility. These observations made her seem more real, more human, while somehow also more impressive. Sarah, for her part, began to see beyond the ceremonial aspects of Marcus's uniform and bearing. She noticed the strength in his stance that came from genuine physical conditioning, the alertness in his eyes that suggested real intelligence behind the formal mask, and the subtle signs of someone who took genuine pride in excellence rather than merely following orders. When Sarah stopped in front of Marcus this time, the silence felt different. Yesterday's electric recognition had evolved into something deeper, something that acknowledged not just attraction, but genuine respect and curiosity. They were no longer strangers sharing a moment of connection. They were two people beginning to know each other despite the barriers of duty and protocol. Marcus found himself wanting to know everything about this Marine. Where had she served? What had brought her to military service? What were her thoughts about duty and honor and the sacrifices their careers demanded? These questions burned in his mind while he maintained his expressionless facade. Sarah felt similar curiosity about Marcus. She wondered about his background, his reasons for joining the Royal Guard, his thoughts about the traditions he upheld daily. She found herself imagining conversations they might have, discussions about military life and personal philosophy that seemed impossible given their current circumstances. The impossibility of their situation became increasingly clear to both of them. Marcus was bound by protocols that prohibited any personal interaction while on duty, and his duty schedule left little opportunity for chance meetings. Sarah's exchange program was limited in duration, and her official schedule was packed with ceremonies, briefings, and formal events that left no room for personal pursuits. Yet despite these obstacles, both felt compelled to find a way to build upon their connection. Sarah began timing her visits to coincide with Marcus's duty shifts, though she varied her approach routes to avoid appearing obvious. Marcus found himself memorizing her schedule, noting when she might appear, and preparing himself mentally for the challenge of maintaining discipline in her presence. Their silent communications grew more sophisticated as the days passed. Sarah learned to read the subtle changes in Marcus's posture that indicated his mood or level of alertness. Marcus discovered that Sarah had a way of positioning herself that conveyed different messages, sometimes showing formal respect, other times expressing friendly acknowledgement, and occasionally revealing glimpses of personal warmth. The other guards began to notice Marcus's improved performance during certain shifts. His already excellent bearing became even more precise, his attention to detail even more meticulous. What they didn't realize was that Marcus was driven by a desire to impress Sarah, to show her the absolute best of what the Royal Guard represented. Sarah's fellow military exchange participants noticed her increased interest in ceremonial protocols and her frequent visits to observe guard procedures. She deflected their curiosity by emphasizing the educational value of studying British military traditions. though her commanding officer began to suspect there might be personal motivations behind her sudden fascination with palace security. The tension of their situation began to affect both of them in unexpected ways. Marcus found himself distracted during off-duty hours, unable to concentrate on normal activities or conversations with his fellow guards. His dedication to his duties remained absolute, but his emotional energy was increasingly focused on those brief moments of connection with Sarah. Sarah experienced similar difficulties focusing on her official responsibilities. During briefings and ceremonies, she found her mind wandering to thoughts of Marcus and the impossible challenge of their situation. She began questioning her own professionalism and wondering if she was compromising her military obligations for personal desires. The breaking point came during a formal ceremony where Sarah was required to observe from a designated area while Marcus and his fellow guards performed a changing of the guard ritual. The ceremony was elaborate and precisely choreographed, with hundreds of spectators and official observers in attendance. As Marcus marched past Sarah's position during the ceremony, their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. The contact lasted no more than an instant, but in that moment, both realized that their silent communication had reached its limits. They needed to find a way to move beyond these stolen glances and momentary connections, or they would have to accept that their relationship would remain forever suspended in this state of unfulfilled possibility. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She began inquiring about official protocols for international military cooperation, looking for any legitimate reason that might allow for formal interaction with palace guards. Her research led her to discover joint training programs, ceremonial exchanges, and other opportunities that might provide a framework for professional contact. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself paying attention to announcements about special duties, international events, and any activities that might involve interaction with visiting military personnel. He began volunteering for assignments he would normally avoid, hoping to create opportunities for legitimate contact with Sarah. Their separate efforts to find a solution reflected their shared understanding that what had developed between them was too important to abandon without a fight. Both recognized that their military careers and personal integrity were at stake, but both also felt that the connection they had discovered was worth the risk of pursuing within appropriate boundaries. The intensity of their situation was building toward a moment of decision. They could not continue indefinitely in this state of silent communication and growing emotional tension. Something would have to give way, either toward a breakthrough that would allow them to explore their connection properly, or toward an acceptance that duty must prevail over personal desires. As Sarah prepared for another day of observations, and Marcus readied himself for another shift of perfect military bearing, both knew that their story was approaching a crucial turning point. The silence that had brought them together would soon be broken, one way or another, and their lives would be forever changed by whatever came next. The opportunity that Marcus and Sarah had both been hoping for arrived in the form of an international military reception at the palace. The event was designed to celebrate cooperation between British and American forces, and it would require ceremonial guards to interact formally with visiting military personnel as part of the official protocol. When Marcus learned that he had been selected for this special duty, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that was completely foreign to his usual calm professionalism. This would be his first chance to speak with Sarah directly, but it would also be under the scrutiny of senior officers from both militaries. The pressure to maintain perfect military bearing while engaging in formal conversation seemed almost overwhelming. Sarah discovered her inclusion in the reception through her commanding officer, who informed her that she had been specifically requested to represent the Marines due to her exemplary conduct during the exchange program. She accepted the assignment with outward calm, while internally celebrating the chance to finally interact with Marcus in an appropriate setting. The day of the reception arrived with typical British weather. a light rain that made the palace stones gleam and added an air of formality to the proceedings. Marcus dressed in his full ceremonial uniform, taking even more care than usual with each detail. Every button was perfectly polished, every piece of brass gleaming, every fold of fabric precise. He understood that this event would test not only his military skills, but also his ability to maintain composure in Sarah's presence. Sarah prepared with equal attention to detail, ensuring that her dress uniform represented the very best of Marine Corps standards. She reviewed protocol procedures and formal conversation guidelines, though she knew that no amount of preparation could fully ready her for the emotional challenge of finally speaking with Marcus after weeks of silent communication. The reception began with a formal inspection of the guards by senior officers from both nations. Marcus stood at attention as American and British generals examined the precision of the ceremonial unit. When Sarah's commanding officer stopped in front of him, Marcus felt a moment of pride knowing that Sarah would witness his performance being evaluated by her superiors. Sarah watched from her position among the American delegation as the inspection proceeded. She felt a surge of admiration seeing Marcus's perfect military bearing under such scrutiny. The way he maintained absolute stillness and precision, while senior officers examined every detail of his uniform and equipment, demonstrated the exceptional standards that had first attracted her to him. The formal portion of the reception moved indoors, where guards and visiting military personnel were expected to engage in structured conversation as part of the diplomatic protocol. Marcus found himself assigned to discuss British military traditions with American visitors, while Sarah was tasked with sharing information about Marine Corps customs with British officers. Their first direct conversation occurred when Sarah approached Marcus during the designated interaction period. Both had rehearsed this moment mentally countless times, but the reality of finally speaking face-to-face felt surreal after so many days of silent communication. Sarah began with perfect military formality, introducing herself and expressing appreciation for the opportunity to observe British ceremonial procedures. Marcus responded with equal professionalism, welcoming her to the palace and offering to answer any questions about guard traditions. To outside observers, their interaction appeared to be a routine exchange between military professionals. But beneath the formal words, both Marcus and Sarah felt the electric connection that had drawn them together during their silent encounters. Speaking allowed them to confirm what they had sensed about each other: intelligence, dedication, and a shared understanding of what military service meant in their lives. As their conversation continued within the bounds of official protocol, they discovered remarkable similarities in their backgrounds and motivations. Both had chosen military service as a way to serve something greater than themselves. Both took pride in maintaining the highest standards of professional excellence. Both understood the sacrifices that their careers required while finding deep satisfaction in their duties. The reception provided them with nearly an hour of intermittent conversation, broken by their other official obligations, but allowing for multiple exchanges. With each interaction, their mutual respect and attraction grew stronger. They learned about each other's training, experiences, and philosophical approaches to military life. Marcus was impressed by Sarah's intelligence and her genuine appreciation for military traditions different from her own. She asked thoughtful questions about British military history and showed real understanding of the discipline required for ceremonial duties. Her respect for his role felt authentic rather than merely polite. Sarah found Marcus to be far more articulate and thoughtful than she had expected. His knowledge of military history extended well beyond British traditions, and his insights into the challenges of modern military service showed a depth of thinking that matched her own. She realized that her initial attraction had been to someone truly worthy of respect and admiration. As the reception drew to a close, both Marcus and Sarah faced the reality that this might be their only opportunity for direct communication. Sarah's exchange program was nearing its end, and there were no other official events scheduled that would bring them together. The thought of returning to their previous state of silent observation felt impossible after finally experiencing real conversation. Marcus made a decision that required considerable personal courage. During their final exchange of the evening, he mentioned that off-duty guards sometimes visited a particular pub near the palace, and that such establishments welcomed visiting military personnel who wished to learn more about British military culture. His suggestion was carefully worded to remain within professional bounds while clearly extending an invitation. Sarah understood immediately what Marcus was offering. She responded by mentioning that her exchange program included provisions for cultural exploration during off-duty hours, and that she had been advised to seek authentic British military experiences beyond formal ceremonies. Her acceptance was as carefully phrased as his invitation, but equally clear in its intent. 3 days later, Marcus entered the Crown and Anchor pub near the palace, wearing civilian clothes and hoping that Sarah would appear. He had chosen this location carefully, knowing that it was frequented by military personnel and would provide an appropriate setting for continued conversation about their shared profession. Sarah arrived shortly after Marcus, also in civilian clothes, looking around the pub with apparent interest in its military atmosphere. Their meeting appeared casual to other patrons, but both felt the significance of this first encounter outside their military duties and formal protocols. Their conversation that evening ranged far beyond military topics. They discovered shared interests in history, literature, and travel. They discussed their family backgrounds, their personal goals, and their thoughts about the future. The attraction that had begun with mutual professional respect deepened into genuine personal connection. As the evening progressed, they found themselves talking with an ease and comfort that neither had expected. The barriers of duty and protocol that had constrained their previous interactions melted away, replaced by natural conversation between two people discovering their compatibility and shared values. When the evening finally ended, both Marcus and Sarah knew that their relationship had crossed a significant threshold. They were no longer just two military professionals sharing silent recognition across a courtyard. They had become two people genuinely interested in each other as individuals, people who wanted to explore the possibility of something deeper and more lasting. They made plans to meet again, understanding that Sarah's remaining time in London was limited, but determined to make the most of whatever opportunities they could create. Their story had moved from silent attraction through professional respect to genuine personal connection, proving that even the most disciplined military bearing could not completely suppress the power of human connection. The silence that had first brought them together had given way to conversation, laughter, and the beginning of something that neither had expected when they first locked eyes across the palace courtyard. Their future remained uncertain, complicated by different military obligations and the demands of their careers. But both knew they had found something worth pursuing despite the challenges ahead. Marcus and Sarah's story continued beyond that first evening at the pub, developing into a relationship that honored both their military commitments and their personal desires. They proved that love could find a way even within the rigid structures of military life, and that the discipline that made them excellent soldiers could also guide them toward a lasting partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Their love story became one that fellow service members would tell for years to come, a reminder that behind every uniform is a person capable of unexpected connections and profound emotions. The Royal Guard and the Marine had found each other across cultural and professional boundaries, proving that some connections transcend all obstacles when they are based on true understanding and respect.